Okay, hello to ADI attendees and other exhibitors. I'm Laura Krumingberg. I'm the Associate Director at Beverage Testing Institute, and today we're going to talk about the importance of objective data, the importance of research, and how that contributes to building a successful brand. And we're going to share the methods that we've learned and with you so that starting today, no matter what your budget is, you can use market research methods to improve your brand and your brand's perception and your marketing materials, etc. So if you're unfamiliar with BTI, we're the research, review, and engagement company for the alcohol beverage industry. You may know us as the conductors of the first international spirits competition in the US. However, the bulk of our business actually lies in our full range of confidential services for brands at any stage. So I'm excited to share what we've learned over our 40-year company history, coupled with the input of the rockstar panelists that I have the pleasure of presenting. These are highly experienced, really talented people, and I'm really excited that we were all on the same sort of panel together. It's very exciting. So, Monique Huston is the Vice President of Wholesale Spirits for Winebow. She's one of the most important, which is one of the most important distributors of craft spirits. She's a renowned as a spirits authority, and through her roles in distribution, education, and advocacy, she has been responsible for the growth of countless brands. She formerly curated one of the largest whiskey collections in the world at the Dundee Bar in Omaha, Nebraska, and I'm also proud to say that she's a BTI panelist. We also have Lee Zaremba with us. He's the corporate beverage director for the James Beard Award-winning Boca Restaurant Group here in Chicago, Illinois. Lee is an experienced PR and marketing professional turned hospitality veteran, and it's very exciting to me that we get such a talented voice from the on-premise as part of the conversation here at ADI. I think that's a very unique opportunity. Chuck Lyle is also with us today. He's the Director of Marketing and Innovation at Terra Sencha, a multifaceted spirits company specializing in Kentucky bourbon production, private label development, manufacturing, and bulk spirit sales. He spent more than 15 years with Boston Beer Company, so that's another kind of very interesting voice to have at ADI. So he's worked on developing brands like Samuel Adams, Angry Orchard, Truly, Hard Seltzer, many more. He holds an MBA. And he's highly skilled in branding development, creative strategy, and brand awareness. Lastly, I've got Gerald O'Kennard, my boss. He is the Executive Director of Beverage Testing Institute, and his leadership has supported some of the world's best alcohol brands through BTI's unique approaches to focus groups, test design, and brand refinement and differentiation. So kind of an overview of what I hope that you're going to walk away after viewing this with would be a greater understanding of the importance of objective data to your brand, the importance of developing a sound marketing plan that is financially balanced with production. A lot of folks we will see invest tons of money into creating excellent juice or having an excellent tasting room, and then the money is not left over necessarily for other needs of a brand. So how to survey and engage stakeholders during the development and go-to-market phases. I also hope you'll walk away with some knowledge on how to capture and interpret the relevant data that is right in front of you in order to build a successful brand. And ultimately, we just want you to learn some tips that can help you avoid expensive mistakes and headaches. And so we've got simple and complex ways to do that that we'll talk about today. So without further ado, let's get started. Gerald, some folks might already be coming into this thinking market research, you know, I'm a small craft spirits brand. This isn't for me. That's the sort of strategy that is available to just giant corporations and folks with millions upon millions upon millions of dollars. How is this relevant to craft brands, Gerald? And why should they consider market research essential to their business?
Well, I think in a nutshell, they can't really afford not to, because they don't have the millions and millions of dollars possibly to write off as debt. They are in it in a lot more skin in the game in terms of their skin and their dollars. And I think it's important for them to realize that they have to kind of go outside of their head and outside of their close circle of people that advise them, and really see what the world needs and what customers need, consumers are looking for, and find out if they have something that is welcome in the market and that the market would consider unique. Consumers would consider unique or important enough to buy. So I think that's why you do it. I think it's even more important for small brands to do it. I think you're right that there's the intimidation factor that it has to be super expensive, but I'm excited in our program to be able to share some very inexpensive and very commonsensical approaches to market research that should be done by any brand, no matter the size.
Anyone else want to add to that of anyone, brands that might think that this isn't an option for them, or it hasn't crossed their mind for one reason or another, and maybe they are doing market research, but they didn't realize it. Anyone else?
I think that the scope and the scale of what market research is that some people think they're too small to even be a player in that whole, so is it on a local level, a state level, on a national level, on a global level? And you just think, I'm just trying to do this one thing in my market for now, but that's not your overall vision. And so you have to be planning ahead, just like you do with your brand plan. Your research plan needs to be looking 10 years out, 5 years out, 3 years out as well. So I think it's very, very appropriate to look from the beginning at what those sources of research are going to be.
Well, Monique, that kind of leads me into my next question then. Where do craft producers need to be before they start diving into market research? What stage do they need to be in? Can they just be thinking, I think one day I want to have a vodka brand, or do they need to have already put a bunch of steps in motion and have investors, et cetera?
Laura, the crazy thing is, even my answer 90 days ago would have been different. The world continues to change on a daily basis. It's quite scary. But even what I would have recommended 90 days ago, now when we started this conversation about having this amazing panel, our conversation has changed that quickly. And so with that, where you really have a benefit as a craft producer is you're nimble. You're not completely locked into something. So you can make those decisions that can change on, at the drop of a hat, because the industry has changed around us. Whereas if you're a massive multi-million-dollar conglomerate, you're probably locked into something 10, 5, 3, 2 years out. And now you're struggling to move many, many, many moving pieces. But in the case of a craft spirits producer, you might just be one person, 3 people, 10 people. And that's a lot easier to change in a market, especially like right now. But one of my early recommendations with small artisanal producers that we work with is literally, you can't just listen to what's going on in your small circle. Gerald, to your original point, you can't just be asking your friends that you've been feeding free booze to for the past few months to give you their opinion on things and what's really trending. The access that we have gotten to data, some levels of big data and some levels of small data in the past 90 days with COVID happening, is you should be looking broadly. You should be reading things like the Mark Brown industry news update that comes out every day. It's free. There are other free resources out there as well, but they can tell you what is trending in terms of general categorical data. So kind of surprising to me through all of this during COVID is the amount of very high-end American whiskey continuing to trend. Very high-end agave spirits. But maybe the most shocking is that rise of home bartenders. So all of a sudden, cordials at home, liqueurs, which we never saw those things in retail sales, that's all trending in the past 90 days. And we don't know what's going to happen in the market in the next 90 days. So, there's access to information, but also who's more on top of that than you guys? An organization like BTI that can not only be tracking overall trends, but really brand-specific trends. So if you're going to start your distillery, or maybe you're going to pivot your production a little bit, you might have thought you were going to get into whiskey, but that's in a lot of cases a few years down the road. Well, so maybe I'll do gin in the short term, but if cordials are trending, maybe I have something really cool that I can do closer to home that's actually going to appeal to that market.
That's super smart. Super smart. Chuck, do you have any tips for folks? Like where does someone need to be in the process of production or ideation? What do they need to know before they dive into a market research plan?
Yeah, you should engage in market research as soon as possible, even when you have just the inkling of an idea. It's critically important to the success of any brand that's going to be out in the marketplace. So the more you know about your market and your potential consumers, the better. And market research is a very broad term, but really what it means is doing your homework, and it runs the gamut from free to very, very expensive. I know in my past, I've spent a lot of money on market research, but you don't have to necessarily all the time. So I would always allow for percentage of your budget to go to market research, but sometimes you could do things for free. Like one of the purest forms of market research, as alluded to, is watching your potential consumers and trying to understand their world. Why do they make the choices they make? How do they shop? How do they dine? And you can gather all this information simply by watching them make a purchase or order from a drink menu. And as a marketer, we often forget that that is the most important thing, is being out and among the people that would potentially be consuming your product, shopping in your stores, dining in your restaurant. I like to call this consumption anthropology. A drinker doesn't necessarily need to know they're being observed, and it's a little creepy, yeah, but it's all great info. Essentially, you're looking for a consumer problem to solve, or a need state. And the bigger the problem you solve, the higher the chance of success. And this is inherently value creation. If your product doesn't bring inherent value, the chance of success is going to be much lower. So how is your product different? What would a consumer have bought if they didn't buy your product? How does it differ from available options in the competition? And once you have a clear solution to a need state, you can continue to refine your offer with further market research.
I think too, Chuck, to add to that, on a highly local level, typically the first question that I ask a really small brand is, are you number one or number two or number three? Are you in the top in your home market, where you literally have your facilities at some point in time available for a tour, at some point in time available for a tasting, and all of the people that work for you at your disposal to hit the market? So if you're not number 1, 2, 3 in your home market, are you really ready to tackle the country, to tackle the world? So, and if you're not number 1, 2, 3 in your home market, why not? Yep. And let's take a look at that product mix. And I love that. I just took a note on that. Consumption anthropology. Get out there among the people and see what's actually going on.
Yeah, ask simple, fast questions. Absolutely.
Okay, so you can collect objective data right in front of you, wherever you are, is what I'm hearing. But I guess that objectivity part, we need to kind of define that. So, Gerald, like, what do we mean when we say objective data? Why is it important to be objective for craft spirits brands? What kind of subjectivities are commonly sneaking in this industry?
Yeah, I think because, it's your baby. When you're a craft brand, what you're making is your baby, and you love your baby, right? You don't want to think anything bad about it. You don't want to think about that it could do something wrong, or not. Someone might not like it. And, as we said, if you go to your circle of friends, they're not going to give you objective data because they like you, whether or not you're giving them, the product to taste and try, or you're just saying, hey, what do you think? They don't want to disappoint you. You have to go to someone that doesn't know you, that frankly doesn't care, who you are. They probably care to help you by being objective, but they don't have any relationship to you. So I think that's the thing. It's really a trap that we see all the time, and we see it in products that come to us, after they thought it was great, and everything is going to be fine and dandy, and it's priced at the right price, and it's in the wrong package. The liquid doesn't taste as good as it should, especially compared to its competition, and the pricing is all wrong. And they come to us and they say, well, I thought it was good, and I thought, my friends told me it would work, and the bartender down the street maybe said that, it has a chance, but that's not enough data points. You need to go beyond your circle and find people that can truly, frankly, tear your product apart and say, hey, is this something that is even needed, to Chuck's point, in the marketplace, or is this just redundant, that's priced too high, that is going to require a ton of marketing dollars to make any sort of dent in sales for this thing? And so I think the idea of objectivity in a nutshell for me is stepping outside of yourself, your subjectivity, and the subjectivity of those around you to other sources that, are just hard-driven market forces that are just responding to the market in general and saying, this is something that fits in the market or doesn't fit in X, Y, and Z reasons.
And it kind of goes with the Provence effect. Wine always tastes better on vacation, right? Yeah. Because you're in the ideal conditions to have it. You're in the right state of mind to love it. And so people that you're asking feedback from, the only experience they have is the one you've set up for them so that they can most perfectly enjoy your brand.
Yeah,
it's so funny.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Gerald.
Oh, I was just going to say real quick is that I just remembered all the people that come to us and say, well, I tasted it out on consumers and they all love it more than X, Y, and Z brand, you know? And I'm like, but you were there pitching and selling and cajoling and doing all the psychological stuff. You weren't being objective and just standing back and saying, hey, what do you think of it? You were selling it into them. And so we see that all the time too, where they say, oh, I did my market research, but you didn't do it the right way.
I just had an example that I don't know if I shared with you all last time we spoke, but you just made me think of it, Laura, with the Provence example. But a prominent buyer here in Chicago at a prominent chain shared with me the story of when Red Stripe was first introduced into the United States. And so Red Stripe beer had that kind of iconic, that stubby little bottle. And they had so many instances of people returning from a trip to Jamaica, buying that beer, and then drinking one and returning the rest of the 6-pack to the store, happening so often that they actually added the caveat on the display that you could not return that beer because it didn't taste as good as you remembered in Jamaica. They had a sign on the display, which I just thought was so funny.
Wow. Chuck, do you have any additions to the definition of objective data?
Yeah, I think as we're all kind of saying here, as we're in the industry, we're going to have an inherent bias. And we often seek ways to make our assumptions a reality. And there are some hard truths that arise from looking at your marketplace objectively and without bias. We always want everyone to love our products, but the reality is not everyone will. Being in bourbon, it always kind of pains me to hear people who absolutely never touch a bourbon for whatever reason. You know, that's a big swath of the population that won't even put spirits in their consideration sets sometimes. So, you know, those people are out there, and you have to listen to them as well. You know, so, you know, often our enthusiasm can cloud our judgment, and great objective data to me can be found through sales figures, data, syndicated data. Blind tastings are a great way, as you were alluding to. Industry news, we already spoke about, and then just casual observation always.
Lee, I would love to hear from you. You're beverage director for a high-profile restaurant group, and not just the group itself, but some of the individual restaurants are known nationwide, perhaps even globally. So I'm curious, you know, you have a pretty unique position there, and I'm wondering what types of mistakes do you see brands making that, you know, instantly you're like, okay, I can't, this isn't, you're not going to make it into this account, or I'm not going to engage with you, or I'm not going to engage with you fully because of X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, I love this question, because you see all different kinds of mistakes people make, because we're all human and we're so emotionally attached to the projects we're invested in. And I think Gerald said it best earlier when he was like, it's your baby. Nobody's going to tell you, you didn't say this, but that's what I thought of immediately. Nobody tells you your baby's ugly, because it's your baby, you know? So on my side, the perspective that kind of bleeds into is people want to talk about their brand with me. They don't want to listen. So people come in with that, I just want some feedback energy, you know, like, hey, will you try this? Can I just steal a couple of your minutes? I know you're busy. I'd love for you to check this out. And the answer is almost always like, yeah, if I have time, let's do it. And in the earlier aspects of my career, I would find myself like falling into that psychological trap of being like, it's pretty good. And then you never buy it. It doesn't help any of the brands, right? So I've kind of like moved into this stage where I just tell people I'm a terrible person right before we taste their product so that they get ready for some data and some feedback. But often those people don't listen to you. And they'll have a lot of interactions with peers that I have across different companies, and then we'll share a beer and end up talking about those brands later. And it's really like they almost made it. They opened all the right doors to get to the people who are combined doing like 60% of the restaurants and bars in the city, but they're not listening to the feedback that they're getting, which is a really big issue. Because if you're out there trying to collect honest data and you're not actually analyzing it later because you're so emotionally attached to your product, it just doesn't benefit you at all. And then you see these people just pushing and salesmanship. And it's just like, hey, like, I thought we were just sitting here to taste and talk about this. So that's been one of the most major. I think to take a step back from the interpersonal relationship of the baby and looking at the product itself is, in a lot of scenarios, I find that the packaging is created to go against competition they see themselves aligning with. So like, I'll get a gin in a blue bottle, right, with like really precious packaging, with a wax seal over the box and elegant tissue paper in there. And then you taste it and you're just like, is this Everclear? I could have sworn this said gin on the label. And it's so far off from the nuancing it's looking to market, because they see themselves in this one particular category. But because they're not good listeners, or because they didn't get honest data and feedback, it just doesn't match. And so if you put that next to a bottle of Bombay, just for an example, and you're hoping to compete with Bombay and you're at a Bombay price point, but it tastes like Everclear liters, it's just not gonna work. And then I would say the third biggest thing that we run into in that same kind of category is actually package design itself. Some stuff's made for the well, and those bottles are usually ergonomically fit for a well. Your hand can grab the top of it, like a speed pour fits in the top. It doesn't have like a European regulator or something that you thought like went well with your brand and speaks to the history and story that you're trying to market and sell. Because there's a lot of just physical common sense that goes with bartender ergonomics. And will somebody want to use this in their well if it's price appropriate and in there? A great example of this to me is Don Julio. I love Don Julio's tequila. I think for a larger, bigger brand, it's a high quality, and I enjoy their product, but it's built for a back bar. So one year they approached a group I was working with that I won't name several years ago. And they were like, we want to be in your well. We're willing to do some business. We want to, like, what can we do? And our answer was like, you'd literally have to change the bottle. Like, you'd have to give it to us in a different bottle, and we would be happy to use it, but we can't. Like, I can't put a squat bottle that's this round in a small well and expect people to pull it in and out of there on it. It's just not feasible. And so, like, the feasibility of design and that lining up with the packaging and then listening to the people that you're directly selling to, that you hope engage in your brand, are probably like the three biggest mistakes and issues that I see on my side of the coin.
Definitely. Okay, so this leads me over to you, Monique. Kind of the same question, but, asked from, I want to hear from the perspective as a primary decision maker for a spirits portfolio at Winebow. Like, what types of mistakes are keeping you as a distributor from picking up brands or engaging with brands more fully once they're already in the portfolio? How does this affect the distribution level? What can go wrong, essentially?
I think, to piggyback on literally the last thing that Lee just said, we have a lot of people bring us things where the packaging does not align with what they say that their goals are. If you bring me something in a cannonball that doesn't fit in a well, but you say that you're a well price and you want to do X amount of volume, that's not going to work. And if you're not willing to listen to that, are you still in the design phase? Are you actually even asking the question? And so we have a lot of that. And if we're at odds right at the beginning in those conversations about what your intent is and what your long-term plan is, if we're at odds right at the beginning and we can't disagree and we can't grow from there, it's not going to end up being a good relationship. We all want to work with people that we like, that we can have discourse with, that we can have a feedback loop, and actually feel heard. I think that's incredibly important. One of the things that we continue to ask a lot for that weighs in even more, I think, in times like this, is continued transparency and questions of ethical production methods and things like that. So also, we need a real level of transparency, because new consumers, they are Googling everything. They want to know every detail of everything. So, if in an initial meeting I'm asking hard questions, I'm not asking like to be a jerk. We hold ourselves in our portfolio to a certain standard, and we're not going to allow just anything in, even if it might move, hundreds of thousands of cases. We really like to kind of hold ourselves to those standards. So we tend to ask a lot of really difficult questions and kind of hold people under even more of a microscope right now. I think too, I'm kind of happy to see this happening very recently, people getting rid of superfluous packaging when they're, so it's like being conscious of having the paper carton or the tin on the outside of something. it looks really nice for a gift. It's certainly easier to wrap when you get to the holidays. But other than that, everybody's just throwing it away. You know, who really needs it? So let's be conscious of what is green. And actually, let's be forward thinking. Let's not be reactive. So I think these things, you know, become increasingly important. I really appreciate it when someone can come to me and say, I found these avenues to examine what your company is already doing in this market. And here's a couple of things that I really respect that are in your portfolio. And I would love to be next to these things when your team is doing presentations. I think that this particular spirit offering that I have is complementary to this other thing. And it takes a few more steps. It takes a little bit more research. But, you know, if you look at let's say my particular portfolio in one state, and it's tons of American whiskey at $100 a bottle price point, then I probably don't need that. But if you literally, just like you could do it on a retail shelf, you could go in and take a look and say, oh, this store doesn't have any Pinot Grigio in the $15 to $18 range. That just takes doing a little bit of eyeballing things and looking at the shelf set. For me as a distributor importer, if you were able to take the same care and do that extra step and look and say, no, you've got a hole in your portfolio in American whiskey between $50 and $80, and I fit right in that niche, and I see what you're doing with the producers that you work with, I'm right there with you, I would be super impressed. I mean, that would be like lots of questions and concerns out the window.
Great information. Chuck, we've talked about challenges to maintaining objectivity, just, you know, with your emotional bond with your own ideas and creations. What are some other challenges to maintaining objectivity when you're innovating or building a brand?
Yeah, one major challenge that I've noted over the years is what I like to call eminence-based decision-making versus evidence-based decision-making.
That's great.
So often the loudest, most vocal, most passionate person in the room is going to get their way, even though the existing data might be out there that would contradict that opinion. I mean, somewhere there was a loud doctor in the 1800s that thought it was a good idea to bleed people out, right? And there was no data behind that, but, you know, some cuckoo doctor was the loudest, most passionate doctor in the room. And, you know, how long did we do that in America? So, you know, that's one example. But in package design, it can be very subjective and opinion-based, right? Like a lot of the times when you're working on packaging, it'll be like, I like it or I don't like it will be the best information that you get back from somebody, but that's not a really good metric to go off of. You know, we were working on a package a couple years ago, and we had two final packaging choices, and this was for a 6-pack, and one was red and one was black. And most people that we talked to, they really liked the black package. I mean, it was sleek, it looked really nice, but like, again, isn't the best metric. So we decided on a set of metrics for our decision-making process, and we decided that time to find was going to be our best metric. So, you know, that was going to be our KPI that we weighted the heaviest, and we ran the packaging through eye tracking tests, and the red package was the clear winner. And essentially what that turned into was, you know, digital mock-up of what the shelf set would be with a red and a black, and then you can actually heat map people's eyes when they're looking at stuff. And granted, this is pretty expensive. But the red one, hands down, was the winner. So everybody's eyes, boom, right? So the red one, the black tended to be a little bit more recessive, and it didn't really catch your eye. And great packaging has to stand out off the shelf from the competitive set. And the black package, you just couldn't find it. So one quick and dirty way to replicate that same test would be to Photoshop your package into the competitive set and flash the image to anybody that would be willing to help you out. You know, that's a real quick and dirty way. I always recommend that with any consumer packaged goods product. Take a picture of where this is going to live on the shelf, on the back bar, and then Photoshop it in there. That's totally free. I mean, obviously you need to pay for Photoshop, but that's a very quick and easy way. And then just a quick glance at it, and you can see right off the bat, like generally you'll start to point towards the one that is going to stand out the best. So I think a consumer being able to recognize and find your brand is arguably the most important packaging factor. Again, to your point, everybody, has to be usability as well, right? So I often, you know, when we're working on design, think about, you know, speed pours in the well, and is it going to adapt to everything that's going on in the bar world? Obviously, you need to think about that. But if you're looking at it on the shelf, it really has to stand out. So packaging design, that to me is the most important thing. But as everybody's kind of alluded to me, the most important factor is taste. Taste is king, and your packaging means little if it doesn't have great taste.
There was so much information in there, Chuck. I just want to unpack that a little bit.
Yeah.
A couple of things that we didn't go into too in depth into too much depth at the beginning was kind of the process of goal setting and being very specific. And so you mentioned metrics and KPIs, and if you're not defining these things, you know, I don't know how you're going to be successful, right? If you can't measure it, how are you knowing you are improving, right?
Exactly.
So the other thing I heard was kind of like there was the sexiest package, and then there was the package with the chance of most success. And
Yep.
if the proper research hadn't been done, you know, and you just went with likability, this, you know, I think that's really important to pull out. And then lastly, the competitive set, we haven't really touched on that much. And I'm wondering, Gerald, if you could kind of talk about how a competitive set can be defined and the importance of going through that process.
Yeah, I think, you know, to pick up where Monique left off about walking an aisle, our friend Brett and Tony recommends that to all brands. And that's really, I think, a key thing is to understand, as Chuck said, where does your package fit in the competitive set of a retail experience for a consumer? And I think, you know, in addition to, you know, how quickly can you pick it out and find it, you know, another friend of ours, Mike Miller, has the 10-foot test. So step 10 feet away from your package on its, you know, on a shelf, back bar, wherever you've placed it. Can you identify the brand? Can you identify what the liquid is? Is it a tequila? Is it a bourbon? Do you know what that thing is from 10 feet? Is it clear enough in the presentation? Because some people are, you know, they want to drink a tequila, and they're looking at the bottles in the back bar, and if they don't recognize that you have an agave product that is a reposado, is that clear? You know, is it all of these things have to be considered at a distance, because that's how people are going to first perceive your product. They're not going to come up this close and say, oh, this is so beautiful. They're going to look at it from a distance and try to identify what that is. So I think that walking the aisle, that 10-foot test is really important. It's not something that people are immediately inclined to do, but it's free, it's cheap, it's something that is essential in terms of your branding and how you're designing your packaging.
Yeah, you're exactly right there, Gerald. And I think from my research, when somebody looks at a package, they look at the name and what is it? And maybe a third item, but that's all they're able to take in that split second. What is it? To your point, is this tequila? So you're exactly right.
Yeah, and then
well, and I think it's a little difficult right now because we're not going to be able to sit at bars for a while, which is like heartbreaking to me. But I'd be interested, Lee, kind of in your take on that and how you see people. You know, it's like, are they kind of? I mean, do you really see somebody almost shopping for a new brand sitting across the bar from you?
I think it definitely happens inadvertently, and I think it happens most often when the bartender is invested in the story of that brand and also thinks it's cool. So I think a lot of the way that brands make it into our space that the general public will be unfamiliar with will be because like we internally found a passion for it. We tasted it. We thought it was cool. It had a great story. A great example of this is there's a brand that it was a gentleman and his partner who were into agricultural farming, started growing their own heirloom corn to create their own style of bourbon. And for us, we were just like, oh, so cool. And so when we tasted it as a staff, the staff's like, why is this cool? It tastes good. And you'd let them know, oh, well, this couple got together and like one was a scientist and one was a farmer, and now they're growing corn and then they're making the bourbon and they're growing trees to make barrels 20 years from now. And you see that kind of investment and passion in a project, and that fills our lungs with words and inspiration to share with our guests. And it doesn't happen often, but when it does, I feel like those are the brands that kind of break that barrier and end up on the back bars of 16 restaurants at a time, passionately conveyed and poured by our bartenders to the guests. And then we hopefully, see that resonate on-premise, because when people are building their at-home bar, they are forever asking me, dude, what should I get? All right, I've got $100. What 3 bottles should I get for my home bar? We have answers.
That's a great example of a product that is destined for on-premise prioritization, right? So I guess, Lee, that kind of leads me to like how can someone have the best chances of having a mutually beneficial relationship with you? I'm hearing a great brand story that actually isn't just a good story, but resonates with the folks working in bars and restaurants. But, you know, Gerald mentioned try putting your product on a back bar and seeing what it looks like. But you can't just walk into a bar and be like, hey, here's this bottle I'm pulling out of my purse. Can you put this on the back bar while I snap a photo? How can someone build a relationship with a bartender and an account so they can kind of have the opportunity to do something like that?
I'll be honest, I know you use that as a funny example, but that happens more often than I would like to. I think one of the mistakes that we talked about earlier was not really listening. I think a good way that people alleviate that issue is doing that market research we talked about earlier about being in a restaurant, right? So if you know that we operate, 21 restaurants in this metropolitan area, like come into a couple of them first. Let's sit at the bar, talk to your bartenders. And then when we finally get a meeting, when we get a face-to-face, and you're like, hey, I was in Girl on the Goat the other night, and I saw that you guys had these 3 tequilas on the back bar, and I'm making this tequila that I'm passionate about, and I feel like there's some synergy between these brands, or understanding the different price structures that restaurants uses, having a little bit of that like internal information sets the stage for us to have a really productive conversation. Because then it's not just like, yeah, another person trying to sell me some shit today. It's like, oh, cool, you go to Grow. Awesome. So you understand what our vision is and how fun the environment is, and you think you have a brand that really fits synergistically. We're just going to pass on that one. You're going to agree with the brand and the restaurant. We end up having a much more productive conversation. So really
probably not at 7 o'clock on a Friday.
Yeah. Monique makes a great point. Don't ask to speak to the manager in the middle of a dinner rush on the weekend and then start randomly pulling bottles out of your bag and throwing them. I think the greatest pet peeve in the history of my life as a bartender and then like general manager and now beverage director is don't take your physical product out on the bar and ask us to make a drink with it. Hey, I'd love to see what you do with this. And then you hand it to like a bartender who's been here for 6 months and they feel pressured because they're working for tips and they want to please you and they want to do a great job and they're here to make it work for you. Find a way to say yes is one of our favorite things we say. And then they do it, and then that person snaps pictures, and then they're just like, oh, I had this tequila cocktail at Grew on the Goat tonight, amazing. And then try to use that social media presence as pressure later is a nightmare approach.
Wow.
So I think the caveats and kind of cornerstones of building a successful relationship with people of just open communication, of curiosity, asking those questions, doing a little bit of homework right before you meet with those people, really tends to lead a pathway into a relationship. Even if we don't carry that product right out of the gate, right now, like a month or two down the line, things change. We work in a very fluid and dynamic industry here. And as those things change, we're always looking for new people to work with and new opportunities and new spirits and ways to revive the passion of the people behind the bar. So if you play your cards right, we get to do that together.
That's great. So we've touched on a lot of options for low cost, free, easy to execute market research methods. I just kind of wanted to recap those and put these all in one place for you guys who are listening, and then start to talk a little bit about what some of these like more intensive options, more investment heavy options that might give better results in some cases, or at least more information for you to make more informed decisions. So Monique, kind of what have we touched on from the like free, low investment market research methods?
I mean, the one that I've mentioned that I think is super important is the Mark Brown Industry News Update. So this comes out every morning. Mark Brown is a genius. I don't know how he finds the time to do this. He's the president of Sazerac, but he puts out a free newsletter every morning at between 4 and 5 in the morning, and he just compiles news from all over the world in terms of spirits, beer, wine, and now cannabis as well. And some of it applies to us and some of it doesn't. Sometimes it's very wine heavy and you scan over those things. But I'll tell you, I go to the ADI conference, or if I'm at BTI really early, or if I'm sitting at one of Lee's bars and it's 7 o'clock in the morning and someone else in the industry is sitting around, they're reading Mark Brown. And that's just a constant conversation. I found out about this in Mark Brown, like he's on it. I'm very proud of Mark Brown. He went from, you had to send him an email to get on it, to if you literally email him, he'll take you to a Google form now. So I'm proud of him. He's gotten with the times. But that to me is number one. The Shanken news update that comes out every day, also free. I think that's a really good one. I really have enjoyed Vine Pair's content and 750 Daily's content, especially in the last 90 days, again, both free. There are a lot of kind of magazines that do online versions, also free, but I will tell you what I have found is the more ads that you see, so if I go to chilled or liquor.com, if there's ads, pop-ups, all these other things going on, the news is probably also highly sponsored by whoever's ads you're seeing around there. So that might not be also part of a conversation about objectivity and subjectivity. That might not be as objective in terms of news. So I really stick with, kind of, Mark Brown, Shanken, Liquor, like Vine Pair, I really like through all this, and 750, I think are awesome resources that everybody has access to because they're free.
Gerald, what are some methods, list form, how can people do some market research, define their competitive set, et cetera, maybe test some package designs, things like this?
Sure. Yeah, I think crowdsourcing is out there. Social media, free. Do a Google survey. Ask the question. Do you see yourself buying this? Describe what the product is, obviously, and show an image of it. And maybe tell a little bit of the brand story. Can you see yourself buying something like this? Is a basic question. Do you think this is a unique product? If you've seen anything like this before, and just shoot it out there in a Google survey. Maybe take a picture of your package, your intended design, and canvas, a Facebook group that's, a whiskey group or whatever, if it's a whiskey you're doing, or your Facebook followers. Crowdsourcing, I think, is a really good way to get some cheap and probably, candid feedback, because, they're doing it through their computer. You're not doing it face to face. There's no kind of pressuring if you're setting the stage right for it. I think that's good initially. I think, if you're in production, we see this a lot, like the second batch doesn't taste like the first batch. Institute some kind of sensory program. So, this is coming from, brewing to wine to spirits, where you have, the benchmarks of your brand, the recipe, the formulation that you said, this is what we want to put out the market, and make sure that you test that with the panel, and make sure that what you're putting out there is consistent, is not variable. We see that a lot with craft brands, that it's different because there's so many things to juggle in terms of the ingredients and the process and the equipment. So I think those are a few that I would recommend right off the get-go.
Chuck?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we touched on it yet really, but rapid prototyping to me is like the fastest way to get feedback, so you always want to fail fast and fail early if you're going to fail. So anything that you can do to comp up a package, a label, try something out, even liquid for that matter, if you have a basic idea of, I was thinking of doing like a s'mores flavored bourbon. So see what you can do to sort of throw some ingredients together that might nail that, and, present it to somebody, what's the elevator pitch here? Here's a smoky sweet bourbon that's reminiscent of a summer night, or whatever the quick pitch is going to be, and then see if it's appealing to somebody. And then, even if, it's not 100% there, at least you're getting feedback quickly to see if people would even be interested in something like that. So yeah, just those instant reactions, and any of those fast prototyping that you can put together, which goes back to, shelf set comps, packaging comps, doesn't necessarily have to be physical. If it's physical, definitely better. People like to interact with your product on a level. So definitely important.
Okay, so stepping it up, people are like, all right, I want to take this really seriously. I've built a certain percentage of my budget. I've built in market research. What should I be prioritizing? What are some kind of mid-tier investment opportunities for market research? Gerald?
Well, I mean, I think it's important to have sales tools immediately. Let's say you have your product out in the market. You want to get it reviewed. I mean, it's, for spirits review, it's about $500, across all the different competitions. So you have something for a shelf talker. You want to have some sort of third party evaluation of your product that you can leverage and use. I think, if you have budget, as we're saying, if you can carve out budget to actually do some focus groups to further, get feedback on the viability, the market need, basically, what Chuck said, what problems are you solving in the market, what unique kind of proposition you're bringing. Because I think a lot of people don't think about the uniqueness of their product. They think it's unique because they made it, but is it truly unique compared to the competitive set that's out there? And, there are firms that can do smaller focus groups. You can obviously do larger things. You could subscribe to more syndicated kind of data. I know that gets a little pricier, those subscriptions, but that's really important in terms of understanding what's trending in the market. As Monique said, how do you know that your product is going to hit when the interest in that category is peaked out, or it's you need to know. It's essential.
I think too, I would have said at one point in time, I don't know. I mean, Lee is an expert in this field in tasting these things and combining these things into cocktail ingredients. So a score might not have been super helpful for Lee at some point in time. But that being said, now the market has been completely retail driven for 90 days and scores have become important on websites, on shelf talkers. Consumers used to learn about these products from Lee across the bar. Now consumers are having to learn about them on blah, blah, blah.com or on a shelf talker. But it also, somebody can say, I read about this 95% bourbon, and Lee can be like, yeah, this is good. So, I mean, I do think scores have actually become more important.
Yeah, I would agree.
And speaking of bartenders being not as easy to access these days, hire one for a project. Figure out how your product might play in different cocktails. This is not super high cost investment. Hire a bartender to come on as a consultant for a short term, figure out what is and what isn't working according to them. Mm-hmm. Chuck, any other mid-tier or?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we we always like to submit liquids or distillates for testing, and then we like to go with the objective winners. So, obviously, as we're developing stuff internally, we'll run a battery of tests. Most important to us probably is what we're calling tetrad tests. It's an industry term. I don't know if you're familiar, but we'll have a statistically significant amount of people generally that we work with that will taste 4 variants of a liquid, and then we'll use that data to submit winners for confirmation on final decisions. So for us, like unbiased third-party data is incredibly valuable. And then for liquids that don't score so well, we'll have to go back to the drawing board and take another shot at it. So yeah, that's definitely part of our development process.
Great. Okay, Lee, could you talk about kind of like final intent, and how producers can kind of align intent with how it's truly going to function behind the bar?
Absolutely. I think Laura made a great point earlier when you said, like, if you have a little bit of money, like, hire a bartender to make some drinks with your product first. Because the creative mind of people behind the bar, why hilarious to talk about at times, is truly a great point of view that not most people can give you. So the ability to have people who know how to put together drinks, try to put together drinks with your product and be able to build a profile of possibles, not for you to make a artfully marketed card to jam in front of me when we meet and talk, but to have an idea of the use and intent of the product, I think is huge. To Monique's point earlier about barrel-aged gin, after Ransom made a really good barrel-aged gin, which was done with a historian and somebody who's very into biodynamic production, and like they carefully resourced and looked at all of these different historical recipes to think, okay, this amount of rosehip, this amount of aging might influence these particular classics. And they gave it a roadmap themselves. So by the time we got it, we were like, ooh, let me make that classic with my favorite vermouth and my favorite bitters. You know what? Let me maybe like batch it and throw it in the freezer first and then put it in the glass, and all the different ways that bartenders or, managers or creatives kind of on premise love to experience and get in with a product. I think is going to be a make or break for a lot of different selections, especially things that are a little outside of the box. A great example of this recently was somebody started making a peanut butter whiskey. And I was like, oh, this tastes like really like peanut butter. And the only thing anybody ever said to me was like, peanut butter jelly shots. And I was like, have you been to any of my restaurants? Is this the peanut butter jelly shot situation? So having that framework in mind with like who you're talking to on the on-premise, along with a little bit of a roadmap of possibilities, is just invaluable before sitting down and meeting with the decision maker.
That's great. I think that's it. I don't think we have much more time. I know we're going to go into a live Q&A right now. So thank you very much, everyone. And without further ado, let's roll into that.